everyone, and welcome to MetricStream's GRC Summit 2020, which is coming to you virtually this year. Today, we are doing a presentation on third-party management, then and now, and I'm very excited to have with us one of the industry's leading experts on third-party risk, Linda Chapman. You'll see there she's an advisor, educator, author, expert, but of course, under her career highlights, she's held a number of senior positions in the banking industry regarding third-party risk management as well as procurement, runs Ontala Performance Solutions as well, has authored a book on this topic, which I have had the opportunity to read, and I've also gotten certified in her course, which I recommend to many of you. I am Anna Mazzone. I'm the Managing Director and General Manager for MetricStream. I'm actually based in the UK, and I'll be your host today, and I'll be commenting on a few of the topics that we're going to discuss. So let's go ahead and get started. So the pandemic is teaching organizations around the world some very hard lessons about the value of effective third-party risk management programs, and some glaring deficiencies are coming out regarding the third-party risk management practices across industries. So throughout the discussion today, Linda and I are going to reflect on some of these practices before the pandemic. And then, in response to the crisis, we're going to explore three phases of that response. How do we keep the lights on? How do we strengthen the perimeter of our organizations? And how do we actually change the game? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So, Linda, you've got you've actually written this, and this is your, like, today, this is how you see the world. Would you like to comment on what you're seeing in terms of third-party risk management?
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. One of the things that I learned actually from writing the book and from being a chief procurement officer for lots of years and an expert in third-party risk is this notion of trustworthiness, and that goes two ways, right? You have to be a very trustworthy client, and your third parties that you do business with need to be trustworthy. So when it comes right down to it, without strong relationships that can carry you through good times and bad, you're probably finding yourself a bit lost as an organization. So I think back to early days of procurement and watching people kind of pound the table and trying to, sort of get the best price from a vendor. It was kind of like they were the enemy. But in a world where all of our companies run as extended enterprise, this means to me that an extended enterprise is that your company sits in the center of your own universe, but in order to deliver goods and services to your clients, you're highly, highly reliant on all of the relationships you have to make it run. Some of them are really critical to you, and some of them not so much. But the question is, are we of a black swan event? And actually, I was thinking that it was not a black swan event until just yesterday. And somebody in my course actually commented on this, or a couple of people, and said, actually, that it is a black swan because it's unprecedented. So I'm a convert, because even though we might have been able to anticipate a pandemic, I'm not sure that any of us could have seen that this was going to affect everybody in the same way worldwide. So it's back to this hyper awareness of the trustworthiness of relationships and what it's going to do to get you through this. And then when you think about your third party relationships, your activities then and now have to be calibrated for the criticality of the relationship to your own business and the risks that you're facing. And so this is a pretty reliable path to business resilience, but as we know, things have changed so much, we probably aren't as well prepared as many companies thought they were. So, what are your thoughts on that, Anna? Because you're running a business and you have a lot of clients who are in the business of risk management.
Yeah, we do. We absolutely do. I mean, that's our business, is supplying cloud-based solutions for firms to not only manage third-party risk, but enterprise risk and, business continuity risk. So we actually see it not only, the fact that clients who have implemented enterprise integrated risk solutions in this space are able to give boards and the executives confidence around making decisions during this time. But we're also seeing customers moving ahead with making investments in this space. So I think let's kind of focus in on the third-party risk component and kind of what is a third party? I think that's one of the definitions that people kind of struggle with sometimes in the industry. So, Linda, how do you define a third party?
Well, I'm a member of the Risk Management Association's third-party risk management roundtable. I actually run their facilitate their events for it. So back in 2014, when certainly on our side of the pond, when the financial services sector regulators said that you really need to manage this whole extended enterprise, and that includes your third parties. And we spent a lot of time sort of navel gazing and saying, well, what does that mean? We focused on vendors in the past, right? And whether you centrally source your vendor population where they have a procurement department or not, or whether they cover the whole universe of your vendors, in the long run, you can find them because they are paid through accounts payable. So, or a P card, but some sort of payment mechanism that allows you to parse through a lot of information and figure out, well, who are they? And then you can go on from there. But that other element, which is what we coined as kind of the non-vendor population of third parties, and this is just a term we made up just so we had the common language, they're very often acquired by the business themselves. So they're not acquired through a procurement organization, or very, very rarely. And in fact, financial remuneration does not go through your typical accounts payable type payment mechanisms. So if you think about a joint venture or a joint brand partner or agents that act on your behalf, they're not paid through accounts payable. They're paid through many, many other ways, or in fact, sometimes not even paid at all. So trying to understand this universe and all of the relationships you rely on to deliver your goods and services to your own clients is actually pretty complicated. And I actually would hesitate to say that I'm not sure that I know any organization who truly, truly has their arms around this. And they're probably realizing that in the situation we're in today. So this was going through my risk management roundtable, and I've been using this for quite a few years now, and I find it works. Right? It's easy to explain to people. We're talking about vendors. We're talking about everybody else. As long as they're not your customer, they're a third party.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess one of the things I like to say to people is that it is any external stakeholder that you're doing business with that could impact the brand, right, and your reputation, right? So being associated with them, whether it's a charity that you're sponsoring, et cetera, that's a third party, and firms have to take that into consideration. So as we think about the life cycle, I'm sorry?
Sorry. I'm going to add that to my definition. That's affecting the brand. You're quite right.
Yeah. So yes, Linda, life cycle management of the third party and the whole oversight program that's required with third parties. Can you just talk us through this slide here and kind of how you see those two elements in a third party risk management program?
Well, it's interesting. I really like the notion of visualizing the life cycle management. So third-party risk management is all about managing those third-party relationships from the time that you thought you might like to get into a relationship until the time it ends. And so I found it to be a very useful tool to think through the visualization, or to create a visual model of all the major steps that you're going to follow. And it always starts and ends with the business, right? They own the relationships and they own the risk. But I have heard that a lot of third-party risk management, activities and protocols are somewhat opaque to the business, and they don't necessarily understand what you're doing. And because of that, it feels like a bit of an obstacle in terms of getting business done. So when you step back and say, well, what are you actually doing? You're taking people through a set of activities to be able to identify the risk and to be able to assess it, right, in a very consistent manner, to be able to evaluate the risk. So you're coming up with the same risk lens for all your relationships, right? So creating that consistency is actually fairly difficult till you get to the point where you have set the controls, you've negotiated a contract, you've been very clear with the business about what these risks are so they can accept these risks. They're with their eyes wide open. And then it's over to them for the long part of the relationship, which has always been left entirely up to them to figure out how to manage and monitor the relationships when they're in place. So by stepping back and saying, but the risk lens means that you can no longer, as a business unit, decide entirely on your own that you're going to, just put a relationship in place and accept all the risks. There really needs to be this proper process that you put in place to be able to identify, assess, manage, and control risk throughout the whole relationship. And someday when they end, to be able to offboard or terminate the relationship in an orderly manner. So companies who have invested in third-party risk management are at a point today where they probably have some version of this, whether it's complete or incomplete, or they have all the right risks in place or whatnot. So that's basically, you know, roughly, I would say that any mature organization has some version of this. What is a little bit more opaque to me is this whole notion of the methodologies and the controls you have for risk oversight. So people often think about it simply as reporting, but in fact, there's many important elements that go into this, and I find it very helpful to visualize what that might be as well, so you don't miss anything. So for example, third-party risk management is not an island. So all of those other risk policies and processes that you have for your internal operations need now to be outward-facing and consistent. You also need to think about, you know, basically if the business is no longer able to just accept a risk, regardless of the risk, there needs to be a challenge process. And that challenge process is a bit scary for people because now you're challenging people often at a higher level than you are. So you need an escalation path to say, hey, this doesn't look like it's going to fit with our risk appetite, and be able to, you know, sort of kick it upstairs for a closer look. But without an actual challenge process in place, that doesn't happen. And therefore, your business may actually have a lot more risk than you think. So I like to think about it as two sides to the coin, right? So you've got the lifecycle management on one side, and you've got the whole framework and the controls on the other to make sure that your risk management program is consistent across your organization and does all the right things. So that's the way I see it. And yesterday when we were talking about this in preparation, you know, we're talking about that pivot point, and I don't think this is really done outside the financial services sector, but there's this notion, or there's a process called risk and control self-assessment, which belongs to the business. And I'd like to talk in a little bit more detail as we go along, but there needs to be a pivot point here for everything that happens in a company. And I'm thinking maybe an RCSA is a pretty good process that people might like to look into and adopt. So that's the way I see the world: lifecycle management and appropriate governance and oversight.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. I think as firms are in the midst of this crisis, identifying their critical third parties is, you know, going to be the most important thing in terms of prioritizing where they need to focus right now, and to ensure continuity of and sustainability of their businesses. So I thought I'd just comment a bit in terms of methodologies and things that we're seeing kind of shifting a bit with clients, because obviously through our technology, clients are, you know, able to distribute various types of questionnaires and also do a lot of ongoing monitoring of their third parties. But, you know, kind of revisiting those assessments on the third party is most appropriate right now, because things change. You know, business is very dynamic. And so when procurement might have answered or received answers from the third party that, you know, the data they were handling, maybe at the time they weren't handling sensitive company data, or maybe they weren't handling sensitive client data, but that might have changed. The other thing that might have happened is that there might have been several suppliers to the company, and now there's just one. So now you've got a single source, you know, and then also, has the supplier changed how they're doing business? So are they also using fourth parties? Because many times, you know, third party companies that you're doing business with are continuously looking at ways to how to deliver their services more cost effectively. And sometimes that means using third party sources. So I think the other thing that, you know, is happening now is getting a business impact assessment on these third parties and understanding the impact that third party might have on the business unit's financial position, their operational position, their reputation, maybe legal, regulatory impact as well. And then understanding if the services of that third party were to discontinue with very short notice or no notice, what would be the impact on the business? And then how quickly could that third party be replaced, you know, particularly in the next 30, 60 days. And then finally, I think the other thing that there needs to be a focus on is geographic location, right? So not only of the third party, but potentially of the fourth parties, because they might be located in a geography that during this crisis is allowing no import-export capability. Who knows, maybe requiring everybody to work from home, and that's impacting their ability to deliver services to your firm. So these are kind of the areas that we're seeing clients, reconsidering in terms of doing just quick assessments of their critical third parties.
In the long run, Anna, if companies do not invest in technology to manage third-party risk, I can't even imagine they're going through now. They're kind of running blind or relying on the business to try and scramble and keep up with that. So if you haven't invested, we're going to try and give you some ideas on what to do. If you have, at least you know who you're doing business with, and you have a pretty good idea what services they're delivering, and in most cases, you know where they're coming from. But if you haven't invested, I would say that this is I think there's going to be a real growth in third-party risk management capabilities and more people and more companies investing.
So Linda, let's talk about the mitigation activities that you think firms need to consider now to avoid the threats of their businesses being able to continue to run.
Well, I do speak with a lot of heads of third-party risk management, and certainly through this time, I mean, more than ever. So these are the top 5 of things that are happening to companies everywhere, and really you want to give due consideration to. To your point, all around the world suddenly have working from home, or most everybody working from home. So that is definitely in the top 5, and one of the first things companies responded to. So when you have the work from home, we do know that I'm unaware of any companies who really had a good set of clauses and are prepared for work from home scenarios. So it's not addressed in your contracts, and therefore it might not even be prohibited in your contracts. So you need to think about the fact people are working from home. And so can they comply with your control environment? And some of the things that we're seeing basically is, can they even get the hardware and the peripherals to set up safely? But and in fact, we do know that in some countries, in some locations, that the internet is not a very stable commodity. So that being the case, you've got the work from home scenario, and then you've got all the details that sit in behind this. So we know that there's really no such thing as physical security, because you have no control over the actual environment that people are working from. We're seeing some really good technologies like always on VPN. So that means that you can't actually log into anything unless there's a VPN. What you don't know is, how are they connecting to the internet? And it's something you want to find out. Are there people connecting through a secure connection, or are they having to log in through their phones? Because we do see that in some countries where there's not good internet access. We also know that companies are sending out, and they can send it out through a GRC type platform. They're resending out their code of conduct and their basic policies and expectations to companies to say, we want you to confirm you're complying with our expected control environment, even though we didn't anticipate you're working from home. And in some cases, we're seeing this passed on directly to work from home employees, who are also being asked to read and attest to codes of conduct and controls that companies expect to have in place. So those are some of the things. I mean, work from home is just a reality, and I see that we're working from home ourselves today. So, any thoughts on any controls that I should have mentioned, Anna, on work from home?
Well, I think one I'll just comment on, and you raised this one earlier, which is that businesses probably need to start thinking about doing risk and control self-assessments, or CSAs again, with their business unit heads or whoever's running that service line or that particular country, et cetera, just so that they can start to assess what is the operational risk here of the third party, or what are the points of risk associated with running the operation, and how effective are the controls as well in running the operation. So I think we'll start to see, whereas I thought RCSAs might be starting to go away, I'm wondering now if they might have a comeback.
Yeah, I just read a second edition of my book, and I actually had sort of hit on this a while back. I'm thinking RCSAs, where's the pivot point for all of these processes and systems and whatnot? I actually really like them. I think that they could really, if they're done well, they could be done very well. But I do confess that when I was a business leader, I didn't necessarily see the point of doing them as thoroughly as I could have. So I confess, I probably was in the camp of could have done them better. So anyhow, so the next thing that we want to talk about, of course, is the cybersecurity threats. We're seeing some third parties and companies being knocked out at the, knocked down because they're facing these denial of service attacks. I know somebody that one of the most critical third parties was out for 3 whole days. And don't forget, this is one of the best times ever for hackers. And people who are insider threats, often it's not a deliberate thing. That's why they really need to understand the environment. You talked about fourth parties. And a lot of times people don't even know, companies don't even know who their fourth parties are and what they're doing. Good time to find out. And financial health it is already a problem. I mean, companies have not been operating at full capacity for a couple of months now. And if you look to the past history to predict the future, there's going to be financial instability with companies everywhere. So it's back to make sure you're in business with the right third parties and that they're well run, because the well run companies in every industry and every sector will survive. It's those that are, they don't have the best practices that are really at the greatest risk. And we're also seeing that performance is slipping. I'm not aware of anybody actually where companies are truly meeting their SLAs. So there's lots going on here, but that's really what you're looking at right now. And you need insight with your third parties, especially your most important ones, to figure out what's happening with them on these 5 dimensions.
So regarding these top 5 requirements here, very quickly, Linda, in addition to the owner of the third party, so the individual inside that company that owns the relationship with the third party, who else in that company should be involved in kind of working through the mitigation plan on these threats here? What other types of functions I'm thinking?
Yeah, good question. So it depends on the business and the industry you're in. If you're lucky enough to be in an industry, I mean, I come out of financial services and there's very mature risk management practices, even operational risk. And so but in every company, there are individuals who are responsible for cybersecurity, information security, financial health, business continuity management, model risk, and so on and so forth. So whether you're aware of it or not, that somebody has some expertise in this in your company, and you're really looking for them to bring their expertise to the table to help the business owners, the relationship owners, figure out what's the best thing to do. Because it's really, I mean, I know people, it's known as the second line of defense. They're working incredibly long hours trying to figure out just that. What needs to be done? How do I help the business?
Yeah. So let's move over to the next slide, which is around closing those gaps and eliminating those deficiencies. So I was really intrigued with your item number 1, mapping delivery networks to revenue products and services. I think the reason I was so intrigued by it is because of the fact that in the UK, the financial regulator, the PRA and the FCA, are introducing an operational resilience reg, and the rules will come into force in the second half of 2020. And essentially, they call out in their regulation that they want firms to map their delivery networks. So you want to comment on that? I'm not on the regulation, but maybe just on your top 10.
That is absolutely the right approach. And it's basically everybody's learning forward in third-party risk, like all other risk disciplines. So on our side of the pond, the focus has been very much on critical activities and critical relationships, which lends most organizations to think of them discretely as opposed to part of the overall delivery network for individual products and services. So right now, most of the people that I know they're focused on they started out being focused on their tier 1 relationships, their most important ones, which I kind of question if it was the right thing, because most companies, they have the same kind of controls that you do or very close, and they're probably not the problem. So if you go back to this, basically, I think that in today's environment, the best way to protect your organization is to step back and look at your revenue streams or your products and services. figure out which ones are delivering the best, net value organization, because they're not all the same. Some of them are core, you just have to deliver, and others are more profitable than others that are offered by your company. And if you're going to stay afloat financially, you're going to have to focus on your views rather than sort of parsing things by tiers to say, well, let's deal with our most important and then our next tier down. I'd say go all the way down to the bottom in specific service delivery or revenue producing, top revenue producing goods and services that you offer, and look at that entire services or supply chain, as opposed to going through tier by tier by tier, which is the way I think it's being done. So I really like the fact that your regulations there are encouraging companies to do this. I don't think this is being done very well in most companies, period. So yeah, I love the fact that they're doing that as a regulation. It's absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's quite, they're being quite forward thinking in that they're basically what they're saying is it's not if you're going to have, it's when you're going to have an event, right? And so you have to plan for it. We all expect that something's going to happen, but we just want to make sure that you've thought through that whole process end to end, not only in terms of just, identifying the critical services, knowing the third parties that are supporting that, but understanding your impact tolerance, and then also having a really good communication plan, right? With all your stakeholders, not only your clients, but your regulators, et cetera. And then, of course, it goes without saying, good reporting up to the board and the exco.
Well, one of the things that would be characteristic of a lot of third-party risk management programs is that there's a lot of activity and it's not really enough risk insight. And so I think that's one of the things that's really showing up as a deficiency, like a major deficiency is activity does not equal maturity. Maturity does not equal risk insight. Because the point of all this basically is to be very well informed so you can make the best possible decisions in good times and in bad. And so it's the risk insight. So these are ideas that we have in order to make sure you're focused on the right things, because you can never focus on everything. And today you have to absolutely pick the right ones, because your company's survival is really what's at risk right now. So we talked a little bit about our CSAs. I mean, if you're not familiar with them, look them up because they're really a good tool. Also, the risk methodologies, I do see this in a lot of organizations that I work with, that the risk lens, the calculation or the tiering that you do around your risk exposure may be incomplete, it may be kind of skewed. And I think that companies are going to go back and say, well, what are our top risks? So when you and I were preparing, I do remember a couple of years ago that MetricStream had done a survey of its clients asking, what are your sort of top tier risks? And I was absolutely shocked at the time that business continuity risk was not among those of, sort of the average response. So we do know it's up there. So what are your top three? Without a doubt, it's cyber / information security. Sometimes they're inseparable. We've also got the financial health and business resilience. Like if those aren't on your top three list and you really understand how they're going to impact your business, you might be spending your time trying to fix the wrong thing. So yeah. And then I can say this, investment technology.
Well, it certainly helps you get, it certainly helps you get to, good quality information faster so you can make better decisions. So why don't we now move on to this slide, which you had some thoughts around how the leadership strategies are going to need to change.
Yeah, we do know that good leadership is really what prevails. Certainly in good times, you can be less of a strong leader, but in really tough times, it is all about leadership in organizations, and leadership occurs at every level. So we do know that companies have to behave differently right now in order to even survive. And it all comes down to leadership. So we are all leaders. I know that sounds trite, but it's absolutely true. So when you're thinking about your change leadership strategies, don't assume that anybody really knows anything. For starters, there's no water cooler talk, right? People are not even in the office. And so when you think about organizing around how you're going to communicate what you expect people to do and how you're going to change to prepare for a better future, you need to start now. And really, these are all elements of strong change leadership strategies. It really is about communication. It is about having the right metrics. It is about training people making sure that they're well informed, that you're making risk-informed, data-driven decisions. Let me say that again, risk-informed, data-driven decisions. Because if you go on gut feel, you're probably going to make the wrong decisions right now, because we've not seen this before. So you need to go back to data. And then when you need to get the right information out to people, and then you need to measure your observable results to make sure that the change is actually occurring. So this is, people talk about change leadership. It's usually most organizations underinvest in this.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the most difficult part of even getting technology adopted. One of the FCA, one of the regulators, came out and made a comment about 6 weeks ago that he sees more and more business-to-business software solutions fail inside financial institutions because of the lack of investment in change management.
Yeah.
So your points are very well.
And people are desperate for information. They want to know that their leaders are making good decisions and that they understand them, because they will, basically they'll dive in with both feet. Many people, you're either not working at all or you're working double time right now. And so if you're not working at all, you want to see the change leadership strategies come to you so you know that you'll be reemployed soon. And if you're in an organization, you need to take that pause and understand, where's the company going?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now why don't we wind it up with taking the company forward. What are those forward-looking strategies that you think firms need to think about these days?
Well, I'm going to start with the last one first, which is really to energize your relationship and risk management practices. So this is very much about staying close to your third parties, not overwhelming them with too much request for information or whatnot. It's really looking at holding a hand out to make sure that they survive so you can survive. So if I go from the top down, we do know that there has been a lot of work done to date on digitization, robotic process automation. And so I think companies are particularly repetitive tasks that can be roboticized, which is really just a bunch of software programs. And in fact, they will move as many of those over as possible, as quickly as possible. Because there's lots of repeatable kind of boring tasks in companies. And those are pretty easy to go through robotic process automation, because it's software that sits on existing networks. You don't have to change a whole lot to do this. I think that companies are going to invest like crazy in this, and it's regrettable, because that means some of the jobs won't come back. From a risk management perspective, it changes the risk profile. There's certainly a lot of less information security risk that goes down a lot, and what goes up instead is model risk, which is all those algorithms which are driving everything. So we are seeing already that there's a lot of activity to move services around or bring them back in-house, and this is really probably going to hurt a lot of offshore providers of services, because what I'm seeing is companies want to hold those services close. They want them delivered in the same country that they are operating in, and this is happening quite frequently right now. We're also seeing that they're looking at their third parties, and they're getting some nasty surprises. Sometimes stuff has been outsourced to a fourth party, they weren't aware of it. But they're also looking at the strength of those third parties and figuring out, is there another company that we could expand the services with, that we do trust, and move things away from those less trustworthy or less certain suppliers or vendors or third parties, and move them someplace where we feel much more confident. So we're going to see, because of that, a lot of restructuring. You really should ask yourself, what parts of what you're doing should you outsource? We are seeing that there's NPPI, non-public personal information that is with a third or fourth party offshore. That's the stuff that's not happening right now. They want to repatriate that inside their own country or company, and that means they're going to some products and services aren't going to survive because they're not profitable enough, and they require too much attention. And so there's a lot that's going to happen. I think there's probably some new jobs that are going to come out of this. Some of them very exciting, which is this combination of, do you understand risk and operations and strategy, and can you help us put it all together and look at how we're running our business and find out better ways to do things. So I think there's some really interesting times ahead. but it's going to be a little bit rocky for a bit.
Well, Linda, I think you're really right that it is going to be very exciting as we move forward, and the whole world of third parties is really has become elevated as a result of this crisis. So it's always a pleasure to speak with you and to have a conversation around this subject area. You're so full of a lot of knowledge and experience in terms of what's going on and what companies need to focus on, and I think you've provided them a lot of good ideas today in terms of where they need to think about going forward. So I want to thank our audience for listening, and you've got Linda's contact information if you would like to explore with her further how she can help your company. And I would just say thank you for joining the MetricStream's GRC 2020 Summit this year. We have more sessions in store for you, so we hope that you'll take some time out to connect with us. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, my friends at MetricStream. Okay.